It's we're in front of the White House now because the transhumanist-party is marching towards the White House. It's a long march. It's going to be really exciting, and we're going to move into campaign mode here at Detonation. But before we do that, we've got Micah Redding. Thank you very much for joining us here at Detonation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
No, it's okay. And I've been wanting to have you and your co on because I really want to get deep into transhumanism and faith. And it seems like the Mormons are all over this topic. They have a sort of mini monopoly on this topic. So I'm really excited now that we're out of the campaign season to bring all of you guys on and talk about how these two seemingly opposed ideas, religion and transhumanism, are actually flourishing together in some communities, and it seems to be the Mormons over there that are doing it. Can you briefly tell the audience who you are, your background, and just a little bit about yourself? They might not have seen the giant super panel that you were on with all the other people. That was a lot of fun. I hope you had a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great time. And so my name is Micah Redding. I'm the executive director of the Christian Transhumanist Association. So that's a ecumenical group. So there's the Mormon Transhumanist Association, which is Mormons integrating faith and transhumanism, and the Christian Transhumanist Association, which is kind of this broader organization in a sense that brings together all different denominations and traditions of Christianity to try to integrate with transhumanism. And so that's what I do. And as we kind of talked about, we're doing a conference here in a little over a week. It's the second annual Christian Transhumanist Conference, Nashville, Tennessee, and it's going to be incredible, and I'm super excited about it.
That sounds really, really cool, and that's what we're here to announce right now. So on Saturday, October 19, that's USA time. The Christian Transhumanist Conference, the annual one on science, faith, and the future at Liscombe University in Nashville, Tennessee, will involve leading thinkers, both secular and religious, engaging big questions about how science and faith can work together to create a world. This is an annual conference, so you've done it before. Is it always a lot of fun?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the second time we've done it. Last year was the first time, and it was, we never knew quite what to expect, right? Like going into it, doing your first conference, trying to figure out what it will be like and so forth. And it was incredible. And we had people come from around the world, and we had a film crew there from Singapore, and we had National Geographic involved, and a lot of people were kind of tracking it, including Wired Magazine and Christianity Today and so forth. And and so we had an incredible time. And this year we're kind of taking it up a notch, a little bit bigger venue, and really kind of trying to create the conversations that people want to have. And so we're creating a lot of space for these unique conversations that nobody else is really engaging in.
Yeah, and they are unique conversations, but hopefully we advocate here at this show that they will become less and less unique over time as people like yourself, continue to promote these ideas and stuff. Because, transhumanism, it's a derivative of humanism. And, I mean, I'm pretty sure if man is made in God's image, that's a human, right? And so, therefore, you'd want to take care of your fellow humans regardless of what... and I know all the Christians think are different, but regardless of what wicked system you live in, there's always room for improvement, and following Jesus' footsteps in looking after thy neighbor. So regardless, of what Christian faith you come from. So that's really good. Have you? So you've got some really cool speakers. You've got Mike Hergate, who lost his faith and then rediscovered God in science. Today, he helps millions of people navigating questions of spirituality and meaning via popular podcasts. Ask Me Ask Science Mike and the literalists. Would you like to talk about Mike?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, Science Mike is somebody who kind of grew up in a Baptist, Southern Baptist church, and was a deacon and a leader of his church and so forth. And then he started studying science and became an atheist, a closet atheist, and was still working at his church for a long time. And then finally, he kind of came out as an atheist. And when he did that, he went through a period of just being kind of an open atheist and kind of dealing with all the backlash that he got from that, from his family and friends and his culture and so forth, his community. And somewhere in that process, he had a mystical experience. And so he's a very kind of scientifically minded person, but he had this mystical experience, and he couldn't make a ton of sense of it. But what he came to realize is that it was possible to hold these two kinds of things together simultaneously, right? He could have his sense of mysticism and so forth, even if he couldn't explain it in scientific terms, and still hold on to his ability to think rationally about science and so forth. And some of the things he talks about are these the neuroscience of this. Like when we pray, what is it doing to our brains and our brain chemistry and all this kind of stuff? Because we can explain a lot of religious experiences in terms of brain science and brain chemistry, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not real or that we discount them, right? Just like we can explain the taste of an ice cream cone in terms of brain chemistry as well, that doesn't mean we have to discount it. So, so that's one of the kinds of faith journeys he's had, and so that's really interesting. And I think he's always kind of in a process of trying to figure out how to do that better. So we're creating a space for people who are in many different places in their faith experience and faith journey, being very secular or very religious, to kind of enter into conversations about this stuff, because really there's nothing to be scared of in kind of allowing a lot of doubt and questions, and certainly science, into our discussions about religion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about existential. It's existentialism. It's existential questions. It's questions about life, the universe, and everything. And again, if God's made in, if we're made in God's image, I mean, he knew that he was building us with a brain that would react to certain things, and that he knew that, for example, I'm just arguing the cause, but if he knew that there were certain neurological pathways that that if we did pray, they would set things off. And so it's kind of like there's no big deal in that way. If you're looking through the eyes of faith, I mean, all biology is no real big deal. It's just a more of a miracle. It just doubles down on itself, as opposed to saying, oh well, just because there's natural phenomena, it doesn't, it rides it off. No, it's not. Yeah, that wouldn't be a very strong argument. It's just like, it's kind of interesting. So the human GMO, Liz Parrish is patient zero for human genetic modification, having modified her own genome to improve her health and extend her lifespan. She must be on a plane because she was just at Radfest. She's all over the place all the time. Yeah, but that's a big headliner. That's a big headliner. Well done on getting Liz Parrish there.
Yeah. Yeah, we're excited to have her, and I know that people are thrilled to engage in those conversations. So, one of the things last year, our keynote speaker was Aubrey de Grey, and Aubrey de Grey, as people might know, is trying to end aging and extend human life. He's working in this space, and then Liz Parrish has actually undergone self-experimentation, right, to try to work towards something like that. And so this goes back to some of the stuff you mentioned, like being in the image of God and so forth, right? If we're modifying our genomes a lot of people are going to ask questions about, well, what does that mean about who we are as humans and so forth. And so for Christians, I think it's actually really powerful to be able to talk about being made in the image of God, which means that it's not the thing that makes us who we are. The thing that makes us human is not say that we have, like 5 fingers or 5 toes or a certain number of chromosomes or something like that. It's actually our creative and relational nature, which is what I understand being made in God's image to be, right? God is the creator of the universe, and so we're created so that we can create as well. And part of what that means is that we can transform ourselves and we can transform our environment. So we see in the biblical picture of things that right at the beginning, humans are commissioned to use tools and to use science and technology to engage in this work. So I think these are two of the big things that we end up talking about in a Christian context. We talk about the image of God, which I think empowers us to some of these transhumanist projects. And then we talk about the kingdom of God, which is kind of like our vision of the future that we're working toward as people of faith, and hopefully together with the entirety of the world and of life itself. And so, yeah, a lot of this stuff comes into play, and so I think we'll have some great conversations around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jesus came down as a man. That's, you have to remember that. I mean, Jesus ate food. He washed, he bathed, he acted as a man, and not as some sort of super god sentient being, right? But he also didn't say anything about, as far as I can remember, unless I'm reading the wrong book. He didn't say anything about not improving ourselves while we wait for Judgment Day. He always said, so go forth, multiply, and there would, I mean, it's all within the context of a wicked system. So you've got to work within that framework, and I don't know how that fits into Mormon theology, but there wasn't that many constraints in these realms of genomes and gene therapy and neuralase, and I mean there wasn't, if there was, he would have mentioned some constraints, I argue. So that's really interesting that Liz is going to be there, and it's just really cool to see what she has to say. Jim Stump is a VP of BioLogos, an organization at the forefront of faith, science, and dialogue. He founded by Francis Collins, the director of the NIH, a former director of the Human Genome Project. BioLogos aims to reunite faith and science. Human Genome Project, that's pretty cool. Tell us about Jim Stump.
Yeah, definitely. So we mentioned there Francis Collins, current director of the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. and the former director of the Human Genome Project. This is a kind of leading scientist and Christian in America who's written a book called The Language of God, and it kind of talks about how Christians can look at DNA and so forth as being part of the revelation of God as well, right? This is an old Christian idea. This is not new stuff. It's going back to the early centuries of the Christian faith. They talked about the 2 books of nature, right? Or the 2 books of God, what we call the Bible and what science reveals in nature. And so that's a popular framework for that. So, but in the U.S., there's a lot of conflict around things about like creation and evolution, and there's historically been like the Scopes trial and so forth, where these kind of came head to head. And so a lot of people see faith and science in conflict because of some of those arguments that have happened about, how do we read Genesis and what does it tell us? Does it conflict with evolution or whatever? So BioLogos pursues this idea that, in fact, they don't conflict, that evolution is part of how God can create the world, and that's what science says, and we should go along with that. And so Jim Stump is a philosopher who's kind of carrying on that work, and he's written a number of things himself, and he runs the Language of God podcast, and he is really interested in engaging in these discussions around the future, the transhumanist future of humanity, because that's kind of taking it to the next level, right? Instead of these arguments about faith where we might argue about like what are our origins from a faith perspective, now we're talking about what's our destiny from a faith perspective, right? So it's a similar sort of conversation with a lot of the same potential conflicts, but ultimately what we're going to come away with here is there is no conflict between science and faith. Faith can help us navigate the future in a much stronger way, and it doesn't have anything to fear from science or all the possibilities that we're starting to unlock.
Very, very, very interesting stuff there. And I want to talk. So I want to talk more about some stuff you just mentioned, but we'll move on. Cheryl Renee Moses, is it? Mm-hmm. Producer of Urban Media Makers Film Festival, aims to create positive social change through better stories. Cheryl's also author of God Told Me to Tell You to Put Down That Damn Bible, and the founder of a mobile app development company. Sounds like a funny lady.
Yeah.
Who's Cheryl?
Yeah, so absolutely. So she's the founder and director of the Urban Media Makers Film Festival that happens in Atlanta, Georgia, every year. So what they do, Urban Media Makers, I think the official title is Urban Media Makers and Afrofuturism Film Festival. And so a lot of audiences were exposed to Afrofuturism through the movie Black Panther. And the Marvel movie, right? And in this Marvel movie, there's Wakanda, which is this kind of utopian, technological, advanced city. And so this is science fiction, right? But it's science fiction that is coming from a different cultural background than a lot of the science fiction that we've grown up reading, right? So, Isaac Asimov and so forth. And so when we imagine our future, a lot of times we're drawing from assumptions about our past, right? And when we step into various different cultural locations, we realize maybe those assumptions are not correct, or maybe there's other options that need to be considered and so forth. So that's what science fiction does, right? It helps us to imagine better futures. And Afrofuturism is a stream of science fiction that helps us imagine better futures outside of perhaps majority American context. And I think that's really important, in the same way that it's important to have faith be involved in imagining our future. It's also important to have other cultural locations being involved, because we're trying to figure out what the best future looks like for everyone, right? And so how we imagine that is a really critical part of this. And Wakanda in the Black Panther story is actually really profound because through history, we've had different utopias. One of the first utopias was Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. It was written in the 1620s, and it inspired America, actually, and it inspired the British Industrial Revolution. And so these kinds of stories about ideal societies can help provoke profound technological change and advancement. And ultimately, I would say that's what we get with the Christian story of the kingdom of God and the New Jerusalem. We're talking about a utopian kind of world that we want to work towards and live in, ultimately.
Yeah, humans are driven by this need to look up to something, need to be inspired by something bigger and better and greater than themselves. Something good and positive to work towards. Even some of the most disastrous, downright evil regimes that have ever existed, and I won't even go into it, but have been built off the back of this notion of a better future for everybody, right? And so yeah, people respond to these positive visions, and will do anything from being way too good, on the Jonestown level, to
Mm,
doing something else. It's doing nasty things in order to achieve this. But hopefully, we
yeah.
don't have to go down either of those extreme routes, and we can just stay in this
Yeah.
bandwidth of having a community organization, a faith-based organization such as yours, where you can
Hmm.
just talk peacefully in Nashville about
Hmm.
how to
Hmm.
how to work towards these positive aspirations, and that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this lady sounds good, and that idea about Wakanda, absolutely, yeah, absolutely good, because science fiction, yeah, science fiction authors, it's only your mind built off the current trajectory, but technology changes
Hmm.
so fast that by the time you get to the next place, it's like, did it changes again once you get there, and
Hmm.
sometimes it's even more
Hmm.
more awesome. I mean, than you imagine, and
Hmm.
sometimes it's not so
Hmm.
awesome. And like we all thought we'd have flying cars by now, and yet they're sort of popping into existence, but they're not quite here yet. But yeah, that's
Hmm.
really cool. I wanted to just go back to this point on how we need faith, how faith and science can work together, because I just had
Yeah.
Newton Lee on, and he
Hmm.
would be someone to talk about this in greater depth
Yeah.
too as well. But you talk to scientists all the time. You talk to people like Jim Stump. How do they sort of justify uh, this notion of science and the Bible working
Hmm.
together in tandem, when
Hmm.
historians and certain scholars and things have problems with the Bible. They point to dates and histories and how do you, or how do these scientists stand up
Yeah.
to these allegations and say that these do work together?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it comes down to simple genre. So if you think about reading, a science fiction book, you understand it's going to do certain things, right? If you read a historical romance, it's going to do other things. It's going to work with other things. If you read Harry Potter, right? So a fantasy novel which has magic going on. There's different rules for how those stories operate. And in our culture, we think very strongly in terms of something like this divide between, well, is this fact or fiction? But this is a very um, new genre, right? The idea of that we just designate certain things fiction and certain things fact. It's kind of a weird dichotomy because every story, I like to say, every story is based on a true story, right? Somebody got the idea from somewhere. There's no stories that were created from nothing. So when we ask ourselves, what is the genre of, say, something like Genesis 1, which talks about the creation of the world, or Genesis 6, which talks about Noah's Ark and the flood and so forth. Um, then what biblical scholars and historians and so forth will do is will say, well, we have to understand what it was written in, what context it was written in, what was it, who was it written to, and what were they responding to. And I like to point out that Genesis 1, for people who aren't familiar with it, sounds a lot like the 12 days of Christmas. So if you know this song, like it's on the first day of Christmas, this happened. On the second day of Christmas, this happened, and so forth. That's the structure of Genesis 1. It's actually say on the first day of creation, and it kind of goes on. And so it's a creation narrative that is actually a song, and you'll see like the kind of repeats on it and so forth. And so it's a poetry, right? It's poetry about the creation of the world. And the primary thing it tells us is that it tells us what kinds of creative activities God engages in. And if you look, the people who were writing Genesis 1 were really familiar with other creation stories that were circulating at the time. And they were responding to them and saying, no, it's not like that. It's like this. And so you can look at the Babylonian creation epic, which is really fascinating story where the world is created out of a war between different powers and so forth. And so in Genesis, they're looking at that and they're saying, no, it's not like that at all. The world is created because God is a creator and wants us to join in that creative process. And so even the idea that the world was created in a week in Genesis 1 is designed to tell us that we are participating in the work of creation. Because we work in a week, right? That's what our workflow looks like. That's what God's workflow looks like as well. And so we're in this partnership with God. And the biblical text actually says that. So we need to read these things in the sense they're intended and for the message they're intended to give. And it's not a message about, here's this date where this thing happened and here's another date where this thing happened. It's actually telling us what kinds of creatures we are and what our role is in the universe. And so when you look at it that way, there's really almost no conflict at all.
What type of creatures we are and role we have in the universe. So that's quite a good statement. Gets you thinking, and it makes me think: does the future need faith? Does the future of humanity need faith? Is it something that we should have, or should we move towards a sort of secular society where we throw faith out the window and say that's antiquated, old, and barbaric?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to think that that's what we're doing, or that that's where we should be going, and I don't think the evidence supports that. I don't think. Although in certain parts of society, like North America and so forth, we and Europe and other places, we're becoming more secular. What we see happening is then that we just replace that with something else, right? We look for something else to kind of drive it or to help us fill that gap. And sometimes it's good things, and sometimes it's bad things. And so here. Living in Nashville, Tennessee, I've seen up close like rallies of like white nationalism and so forth that are trying to, I think, fill that religious need. And so I would rather we have good religion that is good for everybody than bad religion. And so that's one thing I think we need to focus on, making sure. I don't think we're going to get a world that's free of religion or free of faith. So let's make sure that the faith we have is the best and most hopeful and powerful and positive faith possible. But the other thing is, do we need it, right? Like even if we could get away from faith, do we want to? And I think actually when you look at the history of scientific and technological progress, it's of course there's all kinds of mixed things that happen, but I think that faith is one of the tools that is used to inspire profound progress. So if you look at just the history of like the Royal Society in Britain and the development of that comes out of a religious vision where they said this is part of our faith is to drive science forward. And if you look at hospitals around the many places in the world are named after saints because Christians knew that part of the Christian mission is to heal the sick. Jesus told his disciples to heal the sick. And so when we have faith, it can actually inspire profound scientific and technological progress. And so I think that the future absolutely needs faith if we really want to get anywhere positive in a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, and so you would argue that this new version of faith, this post what they call Dark Ages, post Dark Ages faith is here to stay. This idea that faith is we've learnt the lessons of some of the other events in the world, and now you're here to stay as a positive force in the world, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Absolutely. Like faith will keep moving and keep growing and keep evolving and adopting new things. One of a really influential Catholic author G.K. Chesterton said, Christianity dies and is reborn because he says it has died many, many times, and each time it is reborn because he said, we follow a God who knows the way out of the grave. Right. So Jesus Christ in the Christian story, like is killed and then walks out. Right. And so Christianity in many ways does the same thing. So, yeah, new changes come along and we adapt to those and we learn from them. In many cases, there's like a reformation or something like that we have to learn some new thing. And then what happens historically is that faith comes back stronger than ever. And hopefully that's where we're at now, where we can have a faith that empowers us all to become more and to work together towards a better future for everyone and everything.
All right, fantastic. So, going forward into the future, we're going to be dealing with a whole bunch of new technologies, new innovations, unless the apocalypse comes or whatever, but Armageddon. But we're gonna be charging forward. So that raises a question: will AI be our friend or our enemy into this future? I mean, like we were saying, God created us. He knew that we were like an intuitive species, an engineering species, a species that built upon itself and improved ourselves. And He doesn't seem to have a problem with that. So we're inventing this thing called AI. Was it going to be our friend or our enemy?
Yeah, so I think the answer is both, right? So just like every time we have a new human born into the world, we run the risk that they could be, another dictator or another Hitler or something like that. We also run the possibility that they could be kind of a wonderful, saintly human being, somebody who cures some profound disease, So that's the possibility we run into every time we have a new person born, and it will be the same way with AI. So I hope that what we do is we learn from that process, because the humans are dangerous, right? People who are born are dangerous. And so the way that we deal with that is we make sure that they grow up in relationship, right? So we, try to put them in a family. We try to, introduce them into society so they have friends and so forth. And when they develop relationships, then they can decide, between becoming a pro-social person or an anti-social person, someone who's working for society or working against society. So I think it's important that as we build AI, that we think of it as our child, our friend, our, partners, things like that, and not our, like our slaves, right? Because that's how you get like these dystopian futures, is where we treat them badly and then they rise up and overthrow us.
Yeah, this is a really good point, because this is what I've been talking to a lot of people about on this show lately, is this: do we build parameters? Do we lock it in a room? Do we try and teach it benevolent methodology? Do we try and love it and embrace it? Or will it just simply be too clever for all of the above? And, that raises a question in my mind. Hypothetically, man gets ignorant. He unleashes what are they called? The Nephilim. Will God come in and have a flood moment? Would God save us from a rogue AI that we created in our ignorance?
That's funny, because one way of this is a creative way. It's I kind of joke around about this, but if you read Genesis, where God creates humanity and then kind of unleashes them on the world and then kind of looks at what they do. One way to read that would be to say, okay, this is someone who has just created some AI and unleashed it and then is like horrified at what happens, right? So we might be in the same situation where we're like, oh no, we shouldn't have made this, right? And that's where in the story, that's where God gets to, where he's like, I don't know if I should have made humans after all, right? Because they're so destructive. And we could potentially get to that same situation with AI. And so then maybe the question is like, will we be, benevolent towards them, or will we try to unleash the wrath of God ourselves, or something like that? But I think, this idea that will God come in and save us from our own, self-destructiveness and so forth. I think what the Christian story, as we go through different steps of it, and we ultimately come to Christ, and Christ is the ultimate answer, God's ultimate answer. And what does Christ say? Essentially, you are empowered to do this. You are empowered to do the work of God. You are grown up as a child of God, and you're inheriting things. So, it's the same situation of like an adult child who is, now taking the keys and taking over the business and so forth. If your parent has to step in to fix things for you, that's because you've really, really screwed up. You're not doing your job right. That's, your job was to start managing this and maintaining it as a responsible adult. And that's kind of the situation I think we're in right now. God wants us to take that responsibility and to take it seriously with all the risks that entails.
So God, there's two questions in here. Both I want to explore. So one, God loves all of his creatures, yeah? Like both human and non-human creatures, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So do you believe that there might be hypothetically alien life out there in the vast unknowns? And God,
sure, yeah.
And God would love them equally, right? I mean,
yeah.
Irregardless of pretty much what they are, like he'd like them, right? He'd love them, right?
Yeah.
So if we did unleash an AI, do you think like he would protect those other beings from us? Like do you know what I mean? Like I don't put up a force field around the planet and say, all right, this is a prison planet now. This has gone rogue. Because if he loves the other beings, I mean, wouldn't he want to protect them from his naughty children here on Earth or something?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Because you are probably familiar with like the Fermi paradox, which is the fact that when we look into the sky, we don't see alien life that we might expect, right? Just given the sheer number of planets and star systems, we would expect that it would be bursting with intelligent life. And we don't really see that. And so that's a question, like, what's going on? Do we not know how to look for it? Or is there something, is it all going extinct? Is there something dangerous out there that's eating everybody? That's a big question that people ask. And so maybe this is one answer to it, right? Which is like, until we sort of pass through a firewall, so to speak, a certain kind of like security filter, maybe we don't have access to see a lot of the life that's out there in the universe. But for exactly that reason, right? We might be potentially destroying it or contaminating it. It's interesting to think about the fact that we live on a planet where because we're trapped in a gravity well, right? We're pretty much the only species that has any possibility of getting outside of this gravity well. And the only way we do it is by cooperating at large scales, right? For most of human history, we were never able to leave the planet. Only when we developed societies that could operate at a near global scale were we able to even tiptoe out of the planet, right? So maybe that is part of it. Like, if we can't figure out how to cooperate, then we don't get access to the rest of the universe. And maybe one day we reach some kind of level of development, and all of a sudden, essentially a curtain falls or something like that, and we see that there are a lot of other species out there waiting for us.
Yeah. Okay. The other question I had is I think Zoltan Itzvan. I was just quickly looking it up. I can't remember if it was in his book or not. But he was talking about this idea that, that if there was if there was a United States president and he was an evangelical Christian, he might want to guide an AI to having Christian values and Christian morals and Christian ethics. Would you be on board with that, or would you want different parameters, different modalities set into that?
Yeah, so that depends on what is meant by Christian values and ethics, right? And so I think a lot of people imagine it means something like certain kinds of ideas about social situations and marriage and so forth. But I would say that Christian ethics and values is about the preeminence of altruism or benevolence or compassion or trust or cooperation. And so that's ultimately, Jesus said, he was asked what the greatest command was, and he said it was basically love. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And basically the scriptures equate those two things, right? So worship to God is occupied in service to others. So that's how we engage these things. So if love is the understanding of what Christian ethics is, then absolutely that's what I want an AI to be running on, right? Because I want an AI to be benevolent to our society. But if it's something like, well, we want to force it into, believing certain things about politics or marriage or something like that, then I would not want that to happen, because that's not how relationships work, right? That's not how you work with a society. It's not how you hopefully raise your kids. Like, you should you allow people in relationship to come to their own conclusions. That's part of what it means to be in relationship. And without that, then we've got nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what does it mean to be human if we're merging with machines?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that image of God idea, which recognizes that we've always been merging with machines, essentially, right? That this is actually part of what we are. And if you think about that in something as simple as our food, we eat cooked food. Like this is one unique thing about humans, is that we eat cooked food, which means that that our digestive systems are adapted to the use of technology, particularly the technology of fire. And so that's a place where we have outsourced part of our body's processes to a technology. And we've been doing that for tens of thousands of years, right? And think about like writing. Writing is just a way we outsource part of our thought to other kinds of tools. And most of us, when we do math, beyond a few simple calculations, we'll use paper or pen or something like that, or maybe we'll go to a computer or phone. We've been doing outsourcing parts of our brain to tools for a very long time. We're already merged with machines. That's part of what it means to be human. And I think that's part of what it is to be in the image of God. And so the Christian idea that God incarnates as a human, right, is very similar to the cyborg idea that humans can incarnate as part machine or become one with machine or something like that. Like, I think we recognize that kind of unification is part of who we are intrinsically.
Yeah, and going back to the Jesus parable, the Jesus story, Jesus embraced technology as well. He wore clothes, he went on boats,
Mm-hmm.
he utilized domestic animals.
Mm-hmm.
He had sandals.
Mm-hmm.
You can think of a myriad of things that he did, and he didn't object to other people using them. He didn't say everybody strip down naked and go back to the
Right.
wilderness. He didn't say any of that. He went about society and used technologies as they were to be used in that century in a functional way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
Jesus technically sort of was a part of the transhumanist experience as well, by his simple
Mm-hmm.
embrace of technologies in the first century AD or whenever it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And Christians very quickly adopted the book, right? So when Jesus was around, people were reading out of scrolls, which is a more primitive book technology. But Christians, as soon as they had access to it, adopted the scriptures and they turned them into books because books are a more advanced kind of reading technology. And so they were some of the first people to use them, and they used them as part of their religion. And so, yeah, technology and religion, go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, and Jesus was familiar with the scriptures. Where would I be but in the house of my Father?
Mhm.
Familiar with the scriptures like the wise men. So that there is a demonstration that he embraced the technology of language and writing, and he didn't
Mhm.
object to them at all. He instead embraced them, and warned people to treasure them,
Mhm.
and defend them. Not to not to throw away everything and run off into back to hunter-gatherer status.
Mhm.
That wasn't the idea. He dismayed at cities being burned to the ground and things like this. So,
Yeah.
what impact is genetic engineering having on the future of our species? Yeah, yes. There's also the Amish GMO adoption as well
Mhm.
in there as
Mm.
well. But what impact is genetic engineering having on the future of our species?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that we are now aware of is that we've already passed the line of like human germline modification, right? So we're modifying not just kind of individuals, but also the gene pool that's being passed on, and we've gotten the ability to do that. And so now we're not going to undo that, right? It's already we're out of the box, so to speak. And so what this means is that human evolution is no longer proceeding solely in a Darwinian fashion, right? It's no longer just kind of selection and mutation and whatever. Now, actually, it's being driven by human culture. So, what does human culture care about? In the case of the scientist in China who did genetic modification on these embryos, he was concerned with eliminating or HIV, right? And so this is something that he did. But what it shows is that our values are now being put into our gene system. And so we have to think really deeply about what those values are, because those values that we have and that we express and that we implement in technology are going to become part of our genetic code and part of what the future of our species looks like.
Fantastic. And and you got Liz Parrish coming there
Mm-hmm.
again. That's going to be big on this topic, human genome, and also you've got the other person, Jim Stump, of Bio
Mm-hmm.
Logos, an organization
Mm-hmm.
at the forefront of faith and science and dialogue. That he will also be a big one to help assist with answering some of these questions. There are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of uh, transhumanist Christians in the world, and I'm sure you're connected with a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
Why are the Mormons so why are the Mormons on the front line of embracing this? And are the Mormons who are embracing this a kind of an offshoot, like are they in line with the mainstream of the church or not? And how does that sort of work?
Hmm. Yeah, so I'm not Mormon, but I'm friends with a lot of Mormons, and I've got an awareness of kind of a bit of shared history. In America, we have this interesting kind of cultural history of uh, back in the 1800s where people were engaging in what were called restoration movements. And so they were trying to say, it's kind of like the Protestant Reformation 2.0. They were basically saying, like, how do we reboot Christianity and how do we get it to be what it should be and so forth. And so one of the movements that came out of that was Mormonism. And so it has a lot of like that heritage of saying like, let's reboot Christianity, get back to like in some ways what the core essence and point of it was in the beginning. And my tradition comes out of that as well as the Church of Christ. Churches of Christ, which is which kind of went a little bit different way with the tradition, but it was like, let's just all kind of boil things down to the minimum, and then we'll all be able to join together with all the different Christian groups in the world and so forth. And I think what happens is when you have these newer movements, they have already grappled with some of this stuff, right? The Mormons came into being in a time when trains were already like becoming a big, technology and things like this, and people were grappling with that. And my tradition came into being in a time when we already had printed books, and we had the ability to, cross the world and do all this kind of stuff. And so technology becomes something that we have to know about and grapple with. And I think it's deep rooted in our traditions. And what I see happening is that so many people from different faiths and different traditions are coming out of a situation where, they had a very, people might call it like a fundamentalist or conservative version of their faith that said, no, we're anti-science, we're, something like this. But then they dig down a little bit, right? And they realize like, oh, actually, our faith tradition is really powerfully empowering us to move forward. And I think that's what I've seen with Mormons. I think it's what I've seen with Church of Christ people. I think that's what I've seen with many Catholics and so forth, is that maybe the people around them in some ways are a little bit like anti what they're doing. But actually, when you kind of step back a little bit, you're like, our tradition is really on a trajectory towards improving the world and embracing the future.
Yeah, and do you see, going to a broader topic of the United States, we're going into the election cycle now, advocating for the Transhumanist-Party, Ben Zion 2020. We're going to cover that here on this channel now. But do you see the beginnings of a mega movement with transhumanism? Do you think that transhumanism is going to make its way onto the debate stage at a Democratic or Republican primary in the next 20 years or so, 10, 20 years? Do you see a groundswell of people who are talking about transhumanism and loving it or hating it? Is it becoming a conversation there in the United States? Are people, is it something that is bubbling on the front of their neocortex, or is it still something kooky?
Yeah, so a little bit of both, right? So part of the situation is that the term transhumanism is not very well known. There is a show that's out years and years where people have talked to me about this show, because in the first episode, one of the young people goes to her parents and she says, Mom and Dad, I want you to know I've decided that I'm trans. And the parents are like, okay, we're going to be accepting and embracing of this. Just, let us know. And after a while, they realize it's a misunderstanding. She's saying, I'm going to be transhuman. I'm going to become a cyborg. And their parents are then like, no, we are not accepting of this. And so a lot of people have talked to me about that, because, that's one place where that has started to show up. But the topics outside of even that terminology are all over the place, right? Everybody's thinking about AI, everybody's thinking about genetic engineering, and people, I think what we have to do is connect that to the things that are really driving our world. So a lot of people are very concerned about the environment and things like that. And so I think one of the things we need to do is to talk about how some of our radically advanced technologies can impact those sorts of questions that people are thinking about on a large scale. Because I think we can offer really great solutions that will be better ultimately for everybody. And I think that will be a great way to connect it with a lot of things that are going on in people's minds and so forth.
Yeah, and I know that that's the same for myself. I mean, I've been in and around this movement for a long time, so it wasn't exactly a big leap for me. But in saying that, it still was a big leap, because you're hitting all over the point, because you see these magic words pop up all over the place. Science, and people are talking about space, and then they're talking about genes, and they're talking about Neuralace, or they're talking about cognitive technologies or something. But trying to put all of that in one place without knowing transhumanism, it's really hard, and it's like, and then you end up going through all these different political parties looking if they have policies on it, and then you end up going, oh well, that one has a policy on it, this one didn't mention it, so I guess I like these guys, but I hate everything else they do. But they're talking about this one thing, and so in that way, yeah, there's an education deficit with the general public that, and it's just a branding thing that the transhumanist movement has to fix. And you're doing your part there with the Christian transhumanists, marching through the core. Do you think the loudmouths, for good or for worse, the Baptists, do you think that they will embrace any form of transhumanism, or do you think that they're a lost cause?
Yeah, it's hard to say. The Southern Baptist Convention recently released a statement on AI that said basically we know it won't become sentient or sapient. It won't become reach human level intelligence. And I responded to that. I said, I don't know how you know this. There's nothing there's nothing biblical or philosophical or theological that would tell us that that's the case. But they've kind of taken a stance that it won't. So I don't know. They might very quickly update their stance if that changes. So
yeah, I've seen Pastor Anderson double down on that quite a few times, saying, for example, Pastor Anderson saying, that it's not going to happen. God will step in before that. It's a challenge to God's authority. The God in the bottle hypothesis. And so, but I don't know. I mean, that's up to them. But I'm going to stand with you on this one and say that all options are on the table, and that God created us as hypothetically, for me anyway, but he created us as intuitive engineering creatures that are here to work out complex and devise complex problems and scenarios. And I don't think he would put a limit on us like that, but I think that if we stuff it up, we stuff it up, and we don't want to stuff it up, and so let's put our brains together and do it correctly. Hypothetically, I think that God would step in, I guess, if there was a rogue superintelligence that. But again, he's out. Most likely, I think he's outside of space and time, so he'd be a-okay. I think. I don't know. It's kind of hard. Even if a super AI did merge and create, with all the matter in the universe, he might still just be locked in a prison bubble of the whole universe, which wouldn't affect God. So I don't know. It's kind of a complicated one. But yeah, humans probably need to start thinking about this, and probably should head off to the Christian convention if you're a Christian and you want to talk about some of these incredibly complicated, big topics. They're coming down like a train to hit the human race, and just talk about these ideas, get them out there, have a think, throw them to your local pastor, throw them to your parish or whoever you happen to be within your community, and start thinking about these things, because if you don't, that's silly. I think we really do need to start thinking about these things.
Yep, absolutely. The more of us that are thinking about them and talking about them, the better our future will be. So we all need to get on board.
Micah Redding, I thank you so much for coming on this episode of Detonation. Just absolutely absolute pleasure talking to you about Christianity and about the future and about AI and about your conference. And I wish you all the best with the conference. You got some big hitters there. I wish I could be there in the United States. I'd come along to these things all the time. I think they'd be fantastic. I got to do some work to find out what's going on here in Australia. There's not much. There is me. And there's Peter Zing, and there's a few other people. There's not much down here, and I want to improve that and do that. So if you or anybody in the Christian community knows of anything going on down here in Australia, send me, Steel Archer, or Detonation an email or write in the comments or whatever, because we want to hook up with all of this community. We want to go to their events. We want to talk to them. We want to see what's going on in other places around the world. But for now, it's there in America. You're there. You're the front man. You're the front runner. Keep it up. Keep it going, and really enjoy your conference.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, I'd love to anybody who can come. But yeah, thanks so much. It's been great to be here.
All right, thanks. That's Micah Redding from the United States. Hey, I'm changing my slogan. Usually my slogan is, all more coming to you all this way, all this week. But I'm changing it for now. For Det Nation, it's Det Nation. We're putting death out of business. And that's my new slogan.
Nice.
Putting death out of business. So that's Det Nation. We're putting death out of business. Thanks very much, Micah Redding.